Okay, now some of you may be wondering, why does any of this matter? You may be thinking that any 2S LGBTQI plus person could be out in the workplace. We have same-sex marriage. What more could we ask for? Allow me to share with you some data that makes the case as to why 2S LGBTQI plus inclusion is important. Let's start with 4 numbers: 67, 41, 11, 14. There are 67 jurisdictions that criminalize private, consensual, same-sex sexual activity between men. Almost half of them are Commonwealth countries. In fact, Uganda, which already had legislation, just recently passed new legislation because they felt the old legislation wasn't far-reaching enough. 41 jurisdictions criminalize same-sex sexual activity between women. There are 11 jurisdictions where the death penalty is imposed, or at least a possibility, for consensual same-sex sexual activity. Lastly, there are 14 jurisdictions that criminalize the gender identity or expression of a person. This is our lived reality. While Canada is a safe place, at least legally, there are parts of the world that still criminalize who we are. Now, you might be thinking, that's in places like Nigeria and Afghanistan, and you're right. As long as we don't set foot in any of those countries, we're good. But are we? Let's bring it back to Canada for a moment, and a study that surveyed nearly 1,500 respondents, of which about 65% identified as sexual minorities, meaning lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, two-spirit, plus. Nearly 35% identified as heterosexual, and about 8% identified as gender minorities with genders other than cisgender man or woman. When respondents were asked about the importance of being out in the workplace, we see that just over 42% of straight cisgender people, that's the blue, think it's not important to be out at work. That is in comparison to 88.7%, or almost 89% of 2S LGBTQI plus respondents in orange, who said it was somewhat important, fairly important, or very important, or very important. What heterosexual cisgender respondents didn't seem to understand was that they were already out. They've never been in the closet. They are able to be open about their sexuality and gender without fear of repercussions, because heterosexuality and cisgender identities are normalized in society. For many in these groups, it would never occur to them to hide their sexual orientation or gender identity, or even to have to consider whether to disclose. In that same report, 2S LGBTQI plus respondents were asked how out they were in the workplace. Their responses were broken down by sexual minorities and gender minorities. Now, as you can see, the majority of gender minorities, which you see in orange, are not out, or they're out to one person. That's about 47%. However, 54% of sexual minorities are out to most people or everyone. In a few minutes, I'm going to be talking about why being able to express one's identity at work is so critically important, but just keep these numbers in mind. The last thing I want to talk about from that report is about people's experiences related to discrimination against 2S LGBTQI plus people in the workplace. So as you can see from this, 67.2% of straight cisgender people, it's the blue, do not believe there is any discrimination in the workplace. That's compared with 62.3% of 2S LGBTQI plus people who said they've either witnessed discrimination or experienced it themselves. Marriage equality didn't erase homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia. It just means that my in-laws can't take my stuff when my husband dies of totally natural causes. The reality is, whether you experience it or not, the world is not a safe place for 2S LGBTQI plus people. Consider that already in 2023, in the United States, nearly 500 pieces of legislation that are against 2S LGBTQI plus people have been introduced. Nearly 500. Not all 2S LGBTQI plus people experience the same levels of violence and discrimination. I want to be clear about that. But it's always there, the potential lurking in the corner. I never know when I'm in a conversation with someone new how that person is going to react when I mention my husband or when they see my nails are painted. That is our reality. So in addition to that study, there's a lot of other studies. And I wanted to share 3 other studies that paint the picture of how open 2S LGBTQI plus people are about their sexuality and gender in the workplace. So the first is a 2016 study commissioned by TELUS that found that only 33% of 2S LGBTQI plus Canadians were fully out at work, and that 1/3 of respondents had either experienced or witnessed discrimination in the workplace. Further, 45% don't believe their workplace is safe and inclusive for trans employees. A 2018 report from the Human Rights Campaign in the United States found that 46% of 2S LGBTQI plus people were closeted at work, leaving 54% of respondents somewhere between 1 person and everyone. 53% of 2S LGBTQI plus respondents to their survey reported hearing homophobic and biphobic jokes and comments in the workplace. Lastly, a 2020 study from Accenture found that most people are still not fully out at work. Across data collected from 3,300 2S LGBTQI plus professionals in 26 countries, only 31% were fully out at work. Even in the most progressive countries, the figure never rose above 42%. And in the least progressive nations, it was as low as 5%. The reason why I'm mentioning all these numbers will become important in just a minute. But just keep in mind that somewhere between 46 and 69% of 2S LGBTQI plus people are not out at work.